Subscribe, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from.
The case of the closed biostation near Tomsk stands as one of the most quietly suppressed Cold War-era incidents, wrapped in missing personnel reports, sealed medical files, and laboratory notebooks no one can fully decipher. Officially, the facility was a veterinary research center established in 1960 to study regional livestock pathogens, but internal memos found decades later imply a secondary directive, involving cross-species viral transmission models, something far beyond the station's public mandate. The site was located deep within a forested reserve, surrounded by double fencing and monitored by a security detail, whose names never appeared in regional staffing records. Former residents recall odd deliveries made at night, refrigerated crates moved without labels, metal cylinders unloaded by men wearing full protective suits, and a strange humming noise that came from underground ventilation shafts. Everything changed in late spring 1982, when a sudden containment breach was cited as the reason for the station's immediate shutdown. The explanation never specified the organism or material involved, only referencing vector instability. Within 48 hours the entire complex was dismantled by military engineers, laboratories stripped down to the concrete, incinerators operated around the clock, and convoy trucks carried away sealed containers under armed escort. Most unsettling was the disappearance of 5 senior staff members, whose personnel files were erased the same week. Local authorities later claimed they had relocated, but no forwarding documents or family communications ever surfaced. For decades the story remained frozen, a whispered anomaly, until hikers discovered buried notebooks in rusted metal boxes near the former site. The notebooks were filled with meticulous entries, written in a cipher-blending chemical shorthand, numeric substitution, and an unknown symbol set appearing only in sections marked as post-phase trials. Even partially decoded fragments mention phrases like avian reservoirs behaving counter to projection, and symptom onset outside expected timeline, suggesting the experiments had moved into risky territory. Some pages show hand-drawn anatomical diagrams of animals not native to the region, accompanied by notes questioning whether the subjects introduced new variables into the environment. The final pages shift abruptly in tone, short, frantic lines referencing cross-vector drift and perimeter breach at Sector C, with the handwriting becoming shaky and uneven. At the bottom of one torn page appears a single line in different handwriting: "Do not assume the hosts remain contained." When the notebooks were handed over to independent analysts in the early 2000s, the first discovery was that several pages were written using inks with different chemical compositions, some consistent with Soviet laboratory stock, others containing compounds not commercially available in the region until decades later. This suggested that someone had added or altered entries long after the station's closure. More alarming were faint imprints on the underlying paper fibers indicating erased lines, many of which aligned with references to an unidentified pathogen class labeled only as variant K. Analysts attempting to decode the cipher encountered repeated patterns resembling early computational encryption, implying that whoever created the system had access to cryptographic training uncommon for biological researchers. One decrypted segment described host resilience beyond predicted curves and unexpected behavioral synchronization among test groups, though the context of these statements remained unclear. Meanwhile, satellite imagery from the 1970s revealed irregular heat signatures beneath the station's main wing, hinting at a subterranean annex not shown on architectural plans. Locals recalled hearing distant metallic sounds long after the official shutdown, and several former forestry workers claimed they were instructed to avoid the surrounding area for reasons that weren't about wildlife. As investigators retraced personnel records, they found every staff member connected to Variant K research had ambiguous exit dates. Some listed months after the station's closure. Relatives of the 5 missing employees reported receiving unsigned letters, advising them not to pursue inquiries for their own stability, a phrase that suggests psychological rather than physical threat. Even more unsettling was a cache of microfilm discovered inside one notebook's spine, containing partially burned images of containment chambers filled with metal restraints, and ventilation seals embossed with symbols matching those in the coded entries. The last frame showed what looked like a corridor under emergency lighting with a shadow of something moving past the lens, its outline too large and irregular to be human. Analysts could not determine whether the image was staged, altered, or genuine, but all agreed on one detail: the camera angle implied it was taken by someone trying not to be noticed. As deeper investigation unfolded, attention shifted toward the sudden demolition of the biostation, a process many experts described as unusually rapid, almost rehearsed. Procurement logs for the demolition contained identical signatures repeated across multiple authorization forms, hinting at forged approvals. Transport manifests for the sealed containers removed from the site referenced a destination coded as Facility 17B. Yet no such facility appears in public or classified inventories from the era. Some researchers believe the containers were diverted to a mobile field lab operating out of a classified rail convoy, documented briefly in archival correspondences as the Northern Circuit. One former military driver later claimed he recalled hauling pressurized units that hummed like engines, though he admitted he was warned that speaking of it would compromise his post-service privileges. The disappearance of the 5 senior staff members became the focal point of later inquiries. Internal payroll data showed they were marked as active employees for nearly a year after the station was destroyed, suggesting they were relocated to an unknown site. Their families received pensions under a clause normally reserved for personnel engaged in high-risk operations, further implying involvement in classified work. When investigators attempted to track the scientists' academic publications, they found several foreign papers from the mid-80s authored by individuals with nearly identical writing styles and research interests, using slight variations of their names. This led some to speculate the scientists continued working under aliases. The notebooks added another twist, a recurring notation reading, "Cycle are approaching collapse." Some cryptographers interpreted this as a biological timeline, possibly referencing mutation or environmental adaptation. Others believed it signified a project phase nearing termination due to containment failure. Scattered across the final pages were rough sketches of containment suits modified with additional shielding around the respiratory system, hinting that, whatever variant K was, it required protection beyond standard protocols. The last decipherable line from the notebooks reads, "Reassignment orders confirmed. We will not return to the surface until the drift stabilizes." Whether this was metaphorical, code, or literal remains unresolved. After the notebooks reached private researchers in Europe, one team specializing in biosurveillance history noticed something odd. Several entries referenced equipment that did not exist in the USS or during the 1960s or early 70s. Mentions of continuous aerosol monitors with active recalibration and microparticle isolation hoods with negative phase cycling matched prototypes developed secretly in other countries years later. This suggested either the biostation had access to foreign technology through covert channels, or the notes were added by someone writing retrospectively with knowledge unavailable to the original staff. Meanwhile, environmental testing of soil samples taken from the former site revealed elevated trace levels of synthetic compounds rarely used in veterinary science, including stabilizers found in experimental aerosolized vaccines. More troubling were pockets of unusual microbial activity detected in deeper layers, organisms showing dormant states inconsistent with known local species. Although samples were too degraded to confirm anything conclusive, the anomalies supported rumors of cross-species viral trials, performed in underground chambers officials denied ever existed. Attempts to contact former support staff led to a pattern of evasive responses. One retired technician stated that he remembered transporting cages at night, but wouldn't elaborate. Another mentioned that the station's electricity bills spiked dramatically in the winter before the shutdown, suggesting extensive use of unlisted equipment. Declassified transport schedules further showed, for unregistered flights landing at a nearby airstrip, between February and April 1982, all documented as maintenance crew rotations, even though no aircraft maintenance facilities existed at that airstrip. The blackout surrounding the 5 missing staff members deepened when researchers discovered that their medical records had been rewritten, each containing the same improbable diagnosis: extended occupational exhaustion. One anonymous whistleblower submitted a scanned document, titled Phase K Interim Protocol, describing emergency procedures for isolating unexpected host responses and mandating the immediate sealing of lower-level labs. The whistleblower claimed the protocol matched the period just before the demolition. The document's authenticity was debated until analysts found microscopic fibers from Soviet-era paper embedded in the scan's border, confirming it had likely been physically smuggled from an archive. The final paragraph of the protocol referenced an event called night transition, a term never used elsewhere, followed by an abrupt end, as if the rest had been deliberately removed. As attention focused on night transition, investigators sought clues about what could have forced an entire facility to be erased within 48 hours. A breakthrough came from a former meteorological officer, who remembered receiving an unusual weather alert on the night the station was evacuated. The alert wasn't from his department, but from a restricted network, normally reserved for nuclear monitoring. It instructed local stations to report abnormal temperature fluctuations or unexplained air pressure drops, aligning suspiciously with aerosol containment concerns. Additionally, old radio logs from a nearby signal station recorded frantic transmissions, containing the phrases, "Seal upper vents," "Cycle are incomplete," and "Exit routes compromised." These logs were reportedly archived incorrectly, buried under unrelated frequencies, which may be why they escaped deletion. Investigators analyzing the decoded notebook fragments noticed a pattern in timeline references. Several notes shifted from standard dates to R-based indexing such as R43 or R72, implying countdowns rather than calendar time. This fueled theories that variant K had an evolving phase that required constant monitoring, and the breach indicated it had moved beyond controllable parameters. Local hunters reported seeing lights under the ground in early 1982, describing a glow seeping from cracks in the frozen soil. Though skeptics believe these accounts were embellished years later, still, thermal scans from declassified reconnaissance flights over the region did detect sudden temperature spikes in the area just days before the demolition. The missing scientists remained the most compelling mystery. A private investigator hired by one family uncovered bank transactions to an offshore account, linked to a research institute that never publicly existed. Travel records suggested at least 2 of the scientists may have boarded a flight under assumed identities shortly after the shutdown. Some believe they were relocated to continue working on variant K in isolation. Others argue they were silenced. The notebook's final sections, particularly those with shaky handwriting, repeatedly mention adaptive silence and response waves out of sync. Cryptographers suggested these terms described either neurological effects on test subjects or an environmental anomaly caused by the pathogen. The last known line from the ciphered material, before the page's end, abruptly states, "If we fail to halt the drift, containment will move with them." Years later, when independent archivists attempted to reconstruct the biostation's chain of command, they found that several administrators had held overlapping positions in different scientific institutions, a practice unusual for the era. Some of their signatures appeared in other classified programs, involving aerosol transmission and environmental monitoring. This suggested the biostation was part of a broader network rather than a standalone research site. One archivist uncovered a mislabeled reel of magnetic tape, marked "Cycle or Trials." Though the audio was heavily degraded, faint rhythmic pulses could be heard, mechanical, repetitive, and oddly symmetrical, as if measuring intervals of biological activity. Analysts theorized it might have been data from respiratory sensors or movement patterns within containment units. The more they listened, the more it resembled breathing. Another tape included overlapping voices discussing limits of host cognition before abruptly cutting off. The station's early architectural sketches, found in a university archive, showed no underground structures. However, a later revision, dated 1978, included a sub-level complex with reinforced walls and isolated air circulation. The revision was unsigned, and the handwriting matched none of the known engineers. Further anomalies emerged when a geologist discovered unnatural depressions in the soil consistent with controlled implosions rather than demolition by force. This supported the theory that the underground labs had been intentionally collapsed to prevent retrieval of material. Rumors circulated among retired officials that variant K was not just a virus, but a multi-phase biological model capable of altering its transmission pathway based on environmental cues. While unsupported by direct evidence, this aligned disturbingly well with notes referencing behavioral synchronization and unexpected host decisions. One chilling passage from the notebooks described test subjects seeking corners, aligning themselves with room geometry, behavior unknown in animals typically used in research. The disappearance of the 5 scientists was revisited when a security guard, nearing the end of his life, confessed that he had seen people escorted below ground and never returning. He claimed the escorts wore protective gear, unlike anything standard for the time, dark, form-fitting suits with full respiratory covers. His testimony ended with the line, "Whatever they carried out that night was smaller than a person, but moved like it knew where it was going." Closure on the biostation case proved impossible because every new lead opened a deeper contradiction. In 2018, a cache of classified procurement files surfaced through anonymous channels, listing purchases of rapid neutralization compounds and secondary barrier fabrics, delivered to an unspecified site near Tomsk in mid-1982, weeks after the station was supposedly destroyed. This indicated either the facility continued operating in secret or portions of it were relocated. One file referenced post-breach environmental correction, a term unheard of in Soviet documentation, but used in classified Western biodefense literature. Cross-analysis of the recovered notebooks revealed consistent use of the same symbol marking urgent entries, a small triangle intersecting a circle. A historian discovered the mark matched annotations from an unrelated Cold War psychological study involving sensory deprivation. This suggested the same research group may have contributed to both programs, indicating a crossover between biological and behavioral experiments. There were also persistent stories from nearby villagers about animals behaving strangely. For weeks after the demolition, wildlife avoiding water sources, birds refusing to land, and dogs howling at the tree line at night. Environmental agencies dismissed these claims, but satellite images from the following summer showed unusually barren patches around the former site, as if vegetation had been chemically suppressed. The most shocking revelation came from a forensic linguist who analyzed the handwriting in the notebooks. She concluded that at least 3 authors contributed to the entries, and that the final frantic lines belonged not to any of the missing scientists, but to an unknown individual with training in emergency reporting. The tone suggested immediate danger, not controlled documentation. Her final note stated, "The last writer was warning someone." As investigators pieced together the timeline, they faced one unmistakable detail. The abrupt shift from methodical research notes to panic coincided exactly with the date of the alleged containment breach.
Subscribe, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from.